Every year, particularly at this time, Sir Matt Busby bears a very personal grief, a grief that paradoxically touches the lives of many people. Sir Matt is 78 years old. For 30 of those years, he has carried the scars, both mental and physical, of a tragic air crash that claimed 23 lives, 8 of them players of his beloved Busby Babes. A disaster in which he nearly lost his own life. A disaster that shattered his dream.
It's a very sad time. It's a very sad time for me because it's a situation and a position and a way that I will never forget. I think the whole scene of the tragedy is a bad memory all throughout because it concerns quite a number of people and a lot of people who I had a great respect for and regard for.
Tommy Taylor, David Pegg, Eddie Coleman, Mark Jones, Billy Whelan, Jeb Bent. Oh. Tragic loss for them.
No way do I think that Munich and Manchester United as a club will ever be separated, because I don't believe that the Munich tragedy made Manchester United as a club. They were on the point of becoming the world's finest club side when it happened.
When the year, turn of the year comes, the first thing you start saying, all right, well, we're getting towards the 6th of February, and you go through all the things that happened. The terrible, tragic time we had in the club and the people concerned who lost their lives, the parents of these people, journalists, staff, and everyone else. And no matter how long it is, one would say, all right, probably the first few years, it affects you more, and you're more aware of it. But time doesn't heal these things, Paul. It doesn't heal them for me, anyway.
I think, and maybe I'm not trying to be clever when I say it, I think he was fortunate in the fact that at the time and around the time, for quite some time, he was in no position to realize what had actually happened. And I believe that that maybe saved a lot of suffering.
Well, it was shock. It was utter shock, you know, and I was so close to Matt, you see. Matt and I played against each other and in the army together and played for the army together, and he captained Scotland, I captained England. So we were very, very close. And of course then, it was the Busby Babes. And I coached the England schoolboys, and Duncan Edwards, and there was David Pegg, Mark Jones, they were all in the side. So I knew the boys.
Let's look what England had got to look forward to. We were preparing for the World Cup in 1958, and Roger, who had moved from a forward to a full-back, was one of the top players in Europe. Duncan Edwards was the outstanding player, and I'm rather sad that youngsters have never seen Duncan play. They always say what a player he was, but they've never seen him. And then Tommy Taylor. He was just coming. And those were 3 players that were in the squad for England preparing for the World Cup in 1958 in Sweden.
To lose this and have to start afresh and to go into a World Cup within 3 months of the disaster virtually, what it amounted to, for the last match, we had 2 established players left. That's Billy Wright and Johnny Haynes. Tommy Finney had been injured, Clayton was out. And we had the rest of them were people who had played 1 international match, 2 of them in the last match hadn't played international match at all. They were being capped in it. That's no way to go into a World Cup. So you can see the Manchester United disaster really destroyed my dream.
It was a tragedy not only to England, for Man United, but the whole of the world, a tragedy, loss of great players.
Well, this is a part of my history as a newspaper man. I always loved coming here because they were such a great side. And I think they set a milestone in English football. They were innovators. They were the first team to come into Europe. And now we're all aware of how European football is shaping. But these boys had to go in completely new, and they made a magnificent job. First year they get to the semi-finals. They were not only a great team, they were an entertaining side.
Free kick to United, taken by Byrne. Headed out to the far side, very cleverly held by Berry, beats his man. It goes to Edwards, which is a good thing for United. A long one from Edwards down the right wing. Taylor's there, Taylor cuts inside, flicks it forward, still has it. And Taylor turns it back to Berry, shoots, and it's a goal, there it is.
They'd got a fellow like Duncan Edwards. And people say to me, how good was Duncan Edwards? And I'm bound to say, and I was a great admirer of Bobby Moore, that if Duncan Edwards had lived, I don't think Bobby would have been a cap. Why not? Duncan Edwards played 18 times for England, scored 6 goals from left half, a goal every 3 matches. We've centre forwards that can't score at that rate now. Behind him, you had Roger Byrne. Roger Byrne was a magnificent left back, again, an innovator. If you think of Ray Wilson in the 66 side, well, he followed on a style that Roger Byrne had perfected. And when you looked at the right half position, little Eddie Coleman, he was a throwback to the old attacking wing half. He was a combination between an inside forward and a wing half, beautifully balanced, small, a magnificent tackler.
United leading by 2 goals to 0. Peg, a long one out to the far side, heads go up there. Still bouncing at the goal mouth, he's hooked away out to this side. Peg racing onto it, turns it right across the far side again, ahead of there by Coleman in the penalty area. First time shot by Taylor, it's blocked.
And then you look at the forward line, Tommy Taylor. Leave outside Lawton, and you have Lofthouse and Tommy Taylor. And probably Tommy would just have the edge on Nat even as a header of the ball. A fellow like Bobby Charlton, he couldn't get in the side. He wasn't a regular in the side. You had Liam Whelan on the ball, a magnificent player on the ball. You'd got Johnny Berry on the right wing. The only reason he never played regularly for England was there were 2 men by the name of Finney and Matthews. At outside left, David Pegg was, I think, just on the verge of becoming England's regular outside left. Mark Jones. You see, Mark Jones was a schoolboy international centre-half, and he was the kind of player that you would have to knock him down to get past him. And at the same time, you see, Matt Busby also had Jack Blanchflower. We all call him the best footballing centre-half in all the 4 countries. Jeff Bent. You see, Jeff Bent was really understudy for Roger Byrne, but he would have walked into any other side. He was a marvellously skillful player. And it was just one of the points of the Busby Babes, as we called him in those days, that they had so many players to pick from.
United had been quick to take the lead. This was through a goal by Dennis Viollet, one of those injured in the crash. In the first half, the British team were making rings round the Yugoslavs, and they scored their second thanks to Bobby Charlton, another of the injured. This is how all would like to remember the boys of this great team playing typically fine football.
Everybody was quite happy. You know, that okay, it was very bad weather, but all we wanted to do was to get home and tell our wives and families about what a great game we'd seen and happy to be back and bring in our presents. And just as we left the terminal buildings, you know, just the odd thought crossed my mind, because I was in the Air Force, you know, I wonder whether there's been any ice on the wings and have they sorted it out. But it wasn't a thing that dwelt on my mind.
It had started to snow a little. When we came back out for our first attempt at takeoff, we were leaving footprints in the snow on the first attempt, or before the first attempt, as we climbed back onto the aeroplane again. And It gradually got a little worse as we tried each time and got out of the plane. What, after the second attempt, it had got quite a bit worse.
There was this very striking red building which was quite clear, and as we came abreast of that, suddenly the skipper just put the brakes on and the props were just whirring round and, hello, what's gone wrong?
Well, we made 2 attempts before the fatal run, and on both of these occasions we had this boost surging, which was not terribly serious, but it was something that one ought to really do something about. And I abandoned the first takeoff and got permission to turn round on the runway and make another attempt. And this fault came out again, and at that stage I decided to go back to the tarmac to discuss it with the engineer.
We set off out to the plane. I had a Rolleiflex camera with me and nipped in front of the queue to take a picture of the boys boarding the plane. Duncan Edwards quipped to remark, another scoop. And I thought, well, it's just another delay. If it's just another picture of United delayed.
When we boarded the aircraft in Belgrade, I found all my press colleagues had already settled themselves in the tail. Frank Swift was on this side, Henry Rose, George Follows on that side, I believe. And you see, we always flew together. We were always a happy party. But for some reason that day I thought I'd move forward. And that was a decision that saved my life. I moved to the forward part of the aircraft because there was more room here, and also because the seats were facing the rear. And there was a lot of argument at the time that they were the safest seats, and there had been an air crash at Cardiff with a rugby team where only one person survived. And it was with that sort of indecision that I moved there, but in fact it was a happy decision. And here opposite me was Harry Gregg. Now I understand that Harry was going to play cards, but in fact he wanted to play with Yugoslav money, and the other boys wanted to play with sterling, and he just said, oh, well, I'm a bit tired, and he sat there. It was a lucky decision for him. Matt, as I recall, was on this side of the plane, just further down amidships. Here was my colleague, Peter Howard, the Daily Mail photographer, and his colleague, the telegraphist. And behind me there was Mrs. Lucic and her baby. And really, between Belgrade and Munich, I was so bored sitting on my own that I actually moved into the rear of the plane to talk to my friends. We were such a happy group. But anyway, on the vital runs, this is where I was sitting. This is how it was on the third tragic run. I fastened myself in, and we set off down the runway, roaring away. And as I looked out, I could see the red building where we'd stopped on the first 2 runs. And as I looked in that direction towards the wheels, I couldn't see whether they were off the ground, and I leaned forward and shouted to Bobby Charlton and to Dennis Weiler, have the wheels gone up? There was no reply. And at that moment I thought, I'll see for myself. Turned, and that was the one moment of fear, because I could see the perimeter fence apparently rushing towards us. And as I turned again in my seat, I got a terrific blow just behind my left ear, and I could feel my senses slipping away. There was a terrific bang at that moment, and as I turned like that, I could see the bulkhead caving in, and there were suitcases flying all over the place. And then as I was trying to clear my head, I couldn't breathe. And then mercifully, my eyes closed. And by that time, of course, we were through the perimeter fence.
The air hostess announced that we were about to make the 3rd attempt, and that lunch would be served immediately we were airborne.
At that stage, I thought everyone on the aeroplane was afraid. There's no doubt about it. Everyone on the aeroplane was afraid at that time, and no one was courageous enough, I don't know what you suppose you call it, moral courage, to stand up and say, I'm not going. And I feel myself, if anyone had stood up and said, I'm not going, I feel no one would have gone.
And I think it was about the speed of 85 knots that one of the engines started playing up again. And after a very short period, we overcame this boost surging, and continued our takeoff.
I sat down very low in my seat, thinking if the belly of this thing does go up, we hit the roof, at least the seat saves my head. So I got down low for this reason, put my feet up on the chair in front of me. And let's say I prepared myself for what I thought might happen.
I was calling out the speeds as we achieved them, and we got to that point on the runway, which we know as V1, which I suppose you might say is the point of no return. And I called V1, and that was the critical point. We were committed for takeoff.
I watched the wheels lock and I knew he was braking again, so I braced myself.
And at this point, the aircraft ceased to accelerate. And I saw the speed drop off from 117 in 2 stages, down to 112 and then to 106. And then Captain Raymond called out, "Christ, we won't make it."
And I remember thinking to myself at the time, Christ, I'm going to get killed. And I've just made the big time. I never see my family again, and I won't see my parents. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get killed in Germany. I can't speak German.
The runway disappeared, and Bobby Charlton was sat next to me, and I said, "Bob," I said, "I think we're going to crash." He said, "Just relax." And there was a couple of minor sort of bumps, and then there was this bang, and the next thing was I was flying through the air, and after that it was very black.
As everything was in blackness, and I couldn't understand this, and I thought I was dead. And I thought, well, I must be in hell because everything's black.
And then I asked Bob, I said, "Have we crashed, Bob?" There I'm without a jacket that's been ripped off and his shoes had been torn away, and I'm asking Bob if we'd crashed. I don't know what I thought had happened to us. So
the people who I think are absolutely magnificent were the people who were conscious. You know, Harry Gregg, who was one of the heroes, Peter Howard, the Daily Mail photographer. He went back in to save lives, and with him went Ted Elliott. Ted Elliott was his telegraphist. Now, Peter Howard went back, and I forget how many people he got out, but from my point of view, he got me out.
I made my way through this hole over one or two of the people that hadn't been as fortunate as I had, and started to run and got about 30 yards away before I stopped, looped round, and Ted was following me up. There's an air hostess following me up, and Harry Gregg had appeared and was stood there with his arms out shouting, come on lads, where are you all, where are you all?"
I had no sense of fear, and I didn't think that I had time to be afraid after what happened, because I heard a child cry inside what was left of the aircraft, and I think this brought me to my senses, and I went looking for it.
One never realised, you know, the terrible tragedy that had in fact hit Manchester, and that thousands of people were virtually in mourning for the loss of these lads.
Well, I was with the Welsh team. The Welsh team played Israel in Cardiff in the World Cup, and my assistant went, poor old Bert, and he had my seat and he went. A taxi from town, and got the office at the top end there, and Alma George, who was our secretary then. I went upstairs, and there seemed to be no one about. It was most strange, there's no one around at all. And I had a drink, gave her a drink, and she said, "Haven't you heard, Jimmy?" He says, "Heard about what?" She said, the plane that's crashed." It never struck me at all. And she said it again. "Oh, I said, we'll have another drink." I'm a quick drinker, by the way, and answered my second one quickly. But she said it again, and she started to cry. And then it struck me very vividly. I thought, God, no. The last thing I thought was a plane crash. So in my John little office there, I went in, I cried myself for 20 minutes, couldn't realise it. It's hard to lose players you're brought up, more or less live with. Very difficult. They start to go into different funerals, you know, it's very, very hard. And probably 2 get buried the same day. But, you know, People everywhere, you know, inside and offices and outside particularly.
The men who were killed at Munich, everybody talks about the Munich disaster, and it was a terrible blow for this club. And sometimes people forget the terrible blow it was for journalism. You're speaking about some of the greatest journalists I personally have ever met. If you take Donny Davis of The Guardian, well, he was a great broadcaster, and he didn't just write a report. He had been an amateur international and a county cricket player. He not only wrote with knowledge, technical knowledge, but he was an essayist. Then you got Henry Rose of the Daily Express. Henry Rose was a great populist. He always used to say, people who follow sport want an argument, they want a discussion, so therefore I'm there. Let's find out what the person in the 4-ale bar is arguing about, and I will provide it. You'd got George Follows of the Daily Herald. George Follows was a magnificent writer. He could have gone to Oxford, and he was just on the verge of going to Fleet Street, and I'm in no doubt at all that he would have ended up the best sports writer I've ever known. On the Daily Mail, you'd got Eric Thompson. He could have been a professional footballer, but he was not only a good technician that way, he had a marvellous sense of humour, and he used to illustrate his points with beautiful thumbnail sketches. So they were special people. And then you come on to Frank Swift. You see, he was a great personal friend. Swifty was not a journalist as you and I would understand it, but he was employed by the News of the World to give his opinions on the game. He got a tremendous sense of humour. And not only that, whatever he wrote or got the ghostwriter to do always had the mark of authority. Well, Archie Legbert was also a fantastic technician, both on cricket and on soccer. And he was doing marvellous work for the Daily Mirror. When he expressed an opinion about players read him because his opinion meant something. And then, of course, the two local papermen, Tom Jackson of the Evening News and Alf Clark of the Evening Chronicle. Now, Alf Clark had been a very good footballer himself. He was this was his club. Manchester United was his club. In fact, of course, it was one of the tragedies that he nearly missed the plane. Tom Curry was counting the players as we got on board, and they were a man short. And then suddenly a Jeep came up, and it was dear Alf in the Jeep. He'd been phoning the paper here in Manchester to tell him that we were held up. And everybody was pulling his leg. And, of course, within a minute, Alf was dead. And if you want to know why so many lives were saved, it was really the incredible pre-planning of Professor Maurer and his staff. Maurer was not only a great surgeon, he was a marvellous organiser. And it was his assistant, the neurosurgeon, Professor Frank Kessel, who became like a surrogate father to me. He went out, and he was a man who escaped from Hitler in the war, and he worked in Manchester at Manchester Royal, and he saw Big Swifty. Das ist ein englischer Fußballspiel. That was the first time they knew that it was an English football team. And he told me afterwards, I was lying beside Big Frank, and we were both bleeding from the mouth. But he said, alas, your dear friend died within a few minutes of being taken into our hospital. He said the belt had ruptured the main aorta artery, and Swifty died.
I'd worked with Matt, and he was sort of semi-conscious in a fashion. He said, "What's you, Jimmy?" And he said, "Keep the flag flying." Johnny Berry's on the next bed there. Tubes everywhere in his ears. No, he was fed to the feet. And apparently he was unconscious for weeks with Johnny Berry. How he survived, I wouldn't know. And next to him was the great Edwards. And I sat with him for a while. He was sort of semi-conscious. And he turned his head and he said, "You, Jimmy." And he said, "What time's the kick-off tomorrow?" Poor fellow.
Now, that boy was mortally wounded, mortally injured, and the first thing he was thinking about was playing for United. Now, that explains Duncan Edwards' character better than any words of mine. And then this particular morning, 17 days, I think it was, but anyway, Dr. Graham Taylor of the BEA, as it then was, came in the room. He was talking to Jackie Blanchflower next bed to me, and as he got to the door, it's inscribed on my mind forevermore. As he turned the door, he just said, I think you'll be able to stand the shock, but don't tell Matt. I'm afraid that Duncan couldn't quite make it. He died early this morning. Now, when he said that, that was the first time I thought, I can't live. If Duncan Edwards can't survive, how can I survive? Selfish attitude. And I felt as though I was going straight through the bed. And then Jackie was shouting, you know, he was crying. And I said, there's no use, Jackie, he's gone. You've got to get yourself well, son.
And I heard someone say Duncan Edwards had died. I knew something terrible had happened. My wife, who was there, I said to her, you have to tell me what has happened. This is making me worse. So when I went through the names, she either nodded her head or just her head like that, which meant that one was saved, the other was dead. Why did I take the club into Europe? Why would you go on a plane? I remember my first reaction was never to have anything to do with football again. And this was my mind, in my mind. And my wife won again. Come along one of these days and said, if these boys had their say that it's passed on, they would want you to carry on.
No one realised I went through hell, come back, and I'd no one to talk to, really. Plenty of people around, but I'm talking at my 11 in soccer. I just found a team of 11. We played Sheffield Wednesday first at Old Trafford. Sheffield team were in, obviously, in the programme, but when I was Manchester United, there was no names at all. Because the team, we didn't know what the team would be, and etc., etc. But they locked the gate. There were 66,000 here on the ground. The enthusiasm was terrific, terrific.
Billy Fuchs wins the toss for Manchester United against Sheffield Wednesday. And it's the most dramatic game Busby's Babes have ever played. Wednesday and the striped shirts kick off. Less than a fortnight after the Munich air crash, the Babes are fielding a scratch side for a fifth-round FA Cup tie. And apart from Fuchs himself, the only member of the original team is goalie Harry Gregg. Now the United forwards are on the attack, and that was nearly it. Brennan takes the corner, and it's in. Pearson shot rebounds, but Seamus Brennan's there to land a beauty. 20-year-old Brennan was only included a few hours before the match, his first big game ever, and he scored 2 goals. 17-year-old Mark Pearson has the ball. Alec Dawson's ready to receive, and there's number 3.
So Professor Maurer and 30 of his colleagues come to England to be welcomed by the Lord Mayor of Manchester and their hosts, Manchester United Football Club, which owes them so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking from my bed in the Iser Hospital in Munich, where I have been since the tragic accident of just over a month ago. You will be glad, I'm sure, to know that the remaining players here and myself are now considered out of danger. And this can be attributed to the wonderful treatment and attention given us by Professor Maurer and his wonderful staff who are with you today as guests of the club.
I got to the stage I was in a way, I was terrified to come and look at the ground and feel the people at that time. And as I say, the biggest obstacle, once I'd done it and I'd forced myself to do it, I had to do it. there was a sudden relief for me. It was a very trying time.
You know, it was bad enough for those of us who, I think, well, okay, I got a lot of injuries, but I mean, that was me, just me. But here we'd got a man who'd built an ideal and just smashed right in front of him, human lives that he'd known since they were little boys.
I would never have been surprised within a year of it happening had I turned around in a coach and saw the lads there. That was the feeling I had about it. Had I turned around in a coach, I don't think it would have shocked me. They should have been there. They were taken away so quickly and so suddenly that it didn't really sink in.
I've never discussed the crash with Sir Matt or anyone who was involved in the crash. You know. So I think we keep our own thoughts on it and we keep our own, you know, we never discuss it. But I felt I always had something driving me on, and I'm sure it was that.
I always think back when I've been successful to how lucky I've been, and wish that I wish that the particular lads that went, that are not with us anymore, could have been there to share it, because they had a big part in it, you know, because the great drive to winning the European Cup was not just for the players' own personal achievements, but probably to prove something and to make something, what seemed to be right, happen.
That night at Wembley, it was a crowning glory for us all. For the players that had gone in the crash, for Bobby Charlton and Bill Fox, who were members of that team, who fortunately survived, even the players, the directors. Laird was the chairman, and directors, and everybody concerned. It was a night of achievement. With the tragedy, there was joy that night. They were still only boys, really. Most of them were killed at 21 years of age. I think the country lost a team which would have been the talk of Europe and indeed the world. Certain times it comes back to me. I think that'll live with me all my life. I think they'll live forever in the history of football, because I think they actually created something in their short life in the game.
Liverpool have had the post-war greatness, but I suppose you might reflect at times that that would have been Manchester United.
That is a very difficult question to answer, because everything was going right. And we had the team, we had the players, and we were taking it in our stride and going along and winning and winning and winning. And it's difficult to know what the outcome would have been, but I know it would have been outstanding. Probably I'm leaning towards Manchester United, but the players that were there at the time were absolutely on their own.